What if I told you that the world came dangerously close to losing one of its most iconic nations through a simple piece of paper? Stop scrolling and stick around, because this is a story about a forgotten treaty that almost erased an entire country from the map. You don't want to miss this. The year was 1750, and Europe was deep in the throes of colonial ambition. From the Americas to Asia, countries like Spain, Portugal, Britain, and France were scrambling to carve up the world. But this scramble had its consequences. Sometimes, even nations themselves were at stake. Enter the Treaty of Madrid, a little-known controversial agreement signed between Spain and Portugal. You see, both nations were eager to divide colonial territories in South America. Spain claimed a massive swath of the continent, including what we now know as Brazil. But Portugal was increasingly encroaching on Spanish-claimed lands. It was chaos waiting to boil over into war. To avoid bloodshed, both nations decided to settle their differences through diplomacy, or so they thought. The Treaty of Madrid was meant to redraw colonial borders. It introduced a revolutionary concept for its time, known as the ut possidetis principle, or possession is 9/10 of the law. Essentially, if Portugal could prove they effectively controlled a piece of land, no matter who technically owned it on paper, they got to keep it. On the surface, it seemed like a fair compromise. But here's the shocking twist. Part of the agreement effectively handed over what we now recognize as Uruguay to Portugal. Uruguay, a country now full of rich history, vibrant culture, and passionate people, nearly disappeared before it even had the chance to exist. Ironically, the treaty overlooked the indigenous Guarani people, who had lived in the region for centuries, as well as the Jesuit missionaries, who were advocates for their rights. The backlash to this treaty was immense. Ultimately, the conflict escalated into war anyway. The short-lived but bloody Guarani War of 1754 to 1756. The treaty was denounced as impractical and full of flaws. Barely 2 decades later, Uruguay would wrest control back from European powers and eventually emerge as the proud nation we know today. So think about this. A simple treaty signed almost 3 centuries ago had the power to erase an entire nation from history. This nearly forgotten event is a potent reminder of how history shapes our present and why we must never take our nation's existence for granted. What other hidden moments have shaped the world we live in today? Follow us for more stories that bring forgotten history to life.